Hello everyone, and welcome back to Forgotten Ties. Today, we're diving into a story so twisted, so unbelievable, it feels like it's been ripped straight from the pages of a thriller novel. But it's not. It's real. It's the story of a woman whose world crumbled in an instant, only to be rebuilt on a foundation of lies she never saw coming. Let me introduce you to Sarah, a woman in her early 40s, with a warmth in her eyes that could melt glaciers. She had this vibrant, almost fiery red hair that always seemed to catch the light just right, a stark contrast to her gentle, unassuming nature. She and her husband, David, a seemingly kind and steady man in his late 40s, had a life that looked perfect from the outside. They lived in a quaint, quiet suburb in Ohio, their home a testament to a shared life of comfort and quiet happiness. David was a software engineer, and Sarah was a talented graphic designer who often worked from their home studio. They were the kind of couple that held hands while walking through the park, that still had date nights on a Tuesday, that finished each other's sentences. Their life was a tapestry woven with threads of trust, love, and stability. Or so Sarah thought. The day everything changed was a Tuesday, just like any other. David had left for a business trip to Seattle, a routine journey he'd made dozens of times before. He'd kissed her goodbye, promised to call later, and with a wave, he was gone. But the call never came. Sarah wasn't immediately concerned. She knew travel could be unpredictable. She sent a text, "Hope you landed safe, Han," and went about her day. When night fell and she still hadn't heard from him, a tiny sliver of worry began to form. She tried calling his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called the hotel he was supposed to be staying at. They had no record of his reservation. That's when the sliver of worry became a jagged shard of fear. Days turned into a week. A week turned into two. David had vanished without a trace. The police were called, and they treated it like a typical missing person case. They checked his financials, his digital footprint, his phone records. Nothing. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist the moment he stepped out of their front door. Sarah was a wreck. Her fiery red hair seemed to lose its luster. Her eyes became shadowed with a grief so profound it aged her 10 years. She was a ghost in her own home, walking through the rooms they had shared, touching the things he had touched, clinging to the phantom scent of his cologne on his side of the bed. She put up flyers, appeared on local news, pleaded with anyone who would listen for any information. The world offered her only silence. As months bled into a year, Sarah was forced to face a grim reality. David was gone. She started to accept the possibility of the worst, that some terrible fate had befallen him. But a part of her, a stubborn, hopeful little voice deep inside, refused to believe it. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this wasn't a random tragedy, but something deliberate. She decided to hire a private investigator, a former detective named Marcus, with a tired face and eyes that had seen too much. Marcus had a different approach. He didn't just look for where David was, he started looking at who David was. It was a painstaking process. Marcus dug into David's past, his childhood friends, his college years, his professional history, everything Sarah had thought she knew. And what they began to uncover was a series of small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies. A colleague who remembered David mentioning a trip to a city that wasn't Seattle. A financial transaction to a shell company Sarah had no knowledge of. A post on a long-forgotten forum under an anonymous username that eerily resembled David's writing style, a post about wanting to escape it all and start fresh. Each little piece was like a grain of sand, and together, they were forming a beach of suspicion. Sarah's grief began to morph into something else entirely, a cold, hard anger. She wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. She was a detective, and she was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The trail led Marcus and Sarah to a small, unassuming town in a different state. It was a long shot, a random lead from an old acquaintance of David's who mentioned a crazy idea David had once floated about moving to a place called Harmony Creek. The name itself sounded too good to be true, a peaceful refuge from the chaos of the world. And as they drove through its idyllic main street, Lined with small-town shops and houses with manicured lawns, Sarah's heart pounded with a mix of dread and hope. Could this really be the place? The place where the man she loved had simply disappeared to? Marcus had a contact in the area, a local law enforcement officer who owed him a favor. With a little discreet digging, they started to turn over rocks. It wasn't long before they hit something solid. A man named Daniel who had moved to Harmony Creek about a year ago. He fit David's description, right down to the little scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. Sarah's blood ran cold. The man was a local handyman, a respected member of the community. He was known for his friendly demeanor, his willingness to help a neighbor, his quiet, steady presence. He was, in essence, everything David had been. But the similarities didn't stop there. Marcus's contact managed to get a hold of a photo of Daniel. When Marcus showed it to Sarah, she almost dropped her phone. The man in the picture was David. Her David. But he looked different. Happier. The lines of stress around his eyes were gone. His smile was wider, more genuine. And he wasn't alone. In the photo, his arm was wrapped around a stunning blonde woman with a laugh that seemed to sparkle, and in front of them stood a little girl, no more than 5 years old, holding a bright red balloon. Her heart didn't just break, it shattered. It wasn't the image of a missing man. It was the portrait of a new life. A new family. The shock was a physical blow. It left her breathless, hollowed out. All the grief, all the endless nights of crying, all the posters and the desperate pleas, it was all a lie. He hadn't been a victim of some terrible fate. He had chosen to leave her. He had chosen to erase her from his life, to start over with a new woman and, it appeared, a new child. The woman wasn't just a girlfriend, she was his wife. They were married, and he had a child with her. The betrayal was so complete, so incomprehensible, it was like a black hole swallowing every memory, every moment of love they had shared. Was it all fake? Had he ever truly loved her? Sarah wanted to confront him, to scream, to demand answers. But Marcus, with a voice of reason, held her back. We need to understand why, Sarah. Why he did this. We need to find the full picture before we make a move. And so, they watched. From a distance, they observed the life Daniel had built. He was a doting father, a loving husband. He volunteered at the local soup kitchen on weekends and coached his new daughter's soccer team. He was living the very life they had talked about, the life they were supposed to build together, but with someone else. It was a mockery of their shared dreams. The more Sarah watched, the more she realized the depth of the deception. The man she knew, the man she had loved and grieved for, wasn't a victim. He was a master manipulator. But as they continued their silent surveillance, a new layer of the story began to emerge, something that went beyond simple betrayal. Marcus, in his relentless pursuit of the truth, had been digging deeper into David's life before he vanished. He found old, encrypted files on a hard drive that David had left behind, a drive Sarah had dismissed as just old work files. Marcus, with the help of a tech-savvy friend, managed to crack them. And what they found was a web of financial deceit. David hadn't just faked his death, he had done it to escape a mountain of debt. He had been quietly, systematically embezzling funds from his company for years, a scheme so intricate it had gone undetected. The business trip to Seattle wasn't a trip at all, it was a cover for a final, massive transfer of funds before he disappeared. He had stolen millions, and the authorities were starting to close in. The new life he had built in Harmony Creek wasn't just a whim, it was a carefully constructed escape plan. The woman he was with, Melanie, and their daughter, Lily, were not accomplices in the grand scheme. They were unwitting participants, pawns in his game. The anger and pain that had consumed Sarah now had a new dimension. This wasn't just about a broken heart, it was about a criminal. He had not only left her to grieve, but he had also left her to bear the brunt of the investigation. The police had questioned her relentlessly, a suspect for a time in his disappearance. He had left her with a life of suspicion and a home filled with the ghosts of a lie. The realization that she wasn't just a jilted wife, but a victim of a sophisticated, cruel con was almost too much to bear. Sarah had a choice to make. She could expose him, bring his carefully constructed new world crashing down, and watch him face justice. Or she could walk away, try to rebuild her life, and leave the ghosts of the past behind. But the ghost wasn't just a memory. He was living a happy, seemingly perfect life with a new family, a life he had paid for with lies and theft. Sarah had to confront him. Not for herself, but for Melanie and Lily. They deserved to know the truth about the man they loved. The man they trusted. She couldn't allow his deception to continue, to fester and eventually poison their lives as it had poisoned hers. So, one rainy afternoon, they drove to Harmony Creek, their hearts pounding in unison with the rhythmic beat of the windshield wipers. They parked a few houses down from his new home, a charming blue house with a swing on the front porch. Sarah watched Daniel come out, laughing as he picked up his daughter and spun her around, her bright red balloon bobbing in the air. The sight was a mirror image of the man she had loved, a ghost of a life she had believed in. But now it was a hollow reflection, a carefully crafted lie. She took a deep breath, and with a resolve she didn't know she had, she got out of the car. The final confrontation was about to begin. Sarah walked up the path, each step a deliberate choice, a rejection of the fear and pain that had held her captive for so long. She saw his face fall as he recognized her. The easy smile, the relaxed posture, it all evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure terror. He didn't say a word, just stood there, frozen. Melanie came to the door, a confused smile on her face that quickly turned to concern as she took in the scene. "Daniel? Who is this?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. Sarah didn't look at him. She looked at Melanie, at the little girl holding the red balloon. "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "And the man you know as Daniel, his name is David. And he's my husband." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Lily's whimpers as she sensed the tension. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation with shouting and accusations. It was a quiet, devastating unraveling. David, now standing before her as Daniel, couldn't deny it. He confessed, his voice a broken whisper, to the web of lies, the embezzlement, the faked disappearance. Melanie's world collapsed. She had no idea. The man she loved, the father of her child, was a ghost, a fraud. Her disbelief turned to horror, and then to a grief so profound it mirrored Sarah's own from a year ago. Sarah's purpose was not to destroy this new family, but to unmask the man who had destroyed hers. She had the documents, the proof of his financial crimes, the evidence that would send him away for a long time. She didn't have to say a word. The truth was there for Melanie to see. And in that moment, as Melanie held her daughter and wept, Sarah felt a strange sense of closure. She had found her husband, but she had also found the truth. And in finding the truth, she had found her own freedom. She had not only unmasked a liar, but had also liberated herself from the prison of her own grief. The rest is, as they say, history. David Daniel was arrested. The new life he had so painstakingly built came crashing down. Melanie and her daughter were left to pick up the pieces, victims of a man they thought they knew. Sarah, on the other hand, was finally able to start her life over truly. The anger and the pain were still there, but they were no longer a prison. They were a part of her story, a testament to her strength and resilience. She had faced the impossible and emerged on the other side, a little bit broken, but with a new sense of purpose. She had sought a missing person, and in doing so, she had found herself. And that, my friends, is the chilling, unbelievable story of Sarah and David. A story that reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not in the shadows, but in the people we trust the most. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you goosebumps, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Forgotten Ties for more stories that challenge what you think you know, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an unmasking. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious.